Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Recurring guest star,
JD. Today we're covering episodes 3 and 4 from Season 2 of Rings of Power. So let's jump right into our rings.
Mm-hmm.
Our first plot line is about Isildur and Pelargir.
Yeah, so it starts off, it shows Isildur's horse running off because I put it as he refused to learn any words for death. He refused to accept that Isildur was dead. I think it's because he shared that apple with him.
It was quite a bonding experience.
Honestly, even the apple scene is starting to make sense after today's episode, because I don't see any other explanation for why this horse would do what it does. It seems like unreasonably determined. It's like, and smart. It almost reminded me of like the Terminator. Like he was traveling vast swaths of land.
Well, remember I said Númenórean horses were special.
Yeah, this one especially.
Well, it is kind of... I don't remember all the details of it, but Númenórean horses are lore accurate, supposed to be special horses.
Yes, I definitely see that now. He makes it back to... I think it's supposed to be the outskirts of Mordor in the Southlands where the battlefield was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was overtaken by very large spiders, which I liked a lot. It's because after a big war, I think they're kind of the one coming out on top are the ones that eat the corpses.
And are you familiar with any other large spiders that live right on the borders of Mordor?
Yes. Isn't it Shelob from the Peter Jackson films?
Yep.
That is probably the only spider I know of. I still think she should have a spin-off because that wasn't really wrapped up what happens to her.
No, the spiders were just kind of teased and then dropped, but I'm sure they'll come back at some point.
So we learned this horse's name is Beric. I consider him like a primary character. So this one I'm committing to memory.
Yes, Beric the heroic horse.
He has like more feats of heroism than 90% of the characters in the show. Like in the 15 minutes he's there, he reminded me of when the hobbits met Aragorn and he saves them like 3 times in a row. Like he gets into like a bunch of fights, he wins them. He's just like horse Aragorn.
Maybe he's the ancestor of Aragorn's horse.
Maybe. I feel like it's more than that even. I feel like he's like, even though this isn't born anyway, I feel like something in Beric gets reinstilled into Aragorn later on.
Well, I think that a scene where the horse is the protagonist is a very fitting scene because the horses, and especially the ponies, get a lot of respect in the Lord of the Rings book. Not so much in The Hobbit. The ponies die multiple times in the Hobbit book. And then, as though to make up for this, the horses and the ponies are always very well treated by the story narrative.
Yeah, I wonder if Tolkien was like going through his The Hobbit when writing Lord of the Rings, and he felt bad about how he treated the horses and ponies.
I seem to recall hearing that his daughter was dissatisfied with the fate of the ponies in The Hobbit.
Yeah, I could see why. So Beric awakens Isildur. He finds him amongst the rubble. He starts to drink from a pond, which even he noticed there was corpses in the water, but even still, it's very full of like volcanic ash that's likely poisonous. It's stagnant water on a battlefield. Like even if you don't see the corpses, it could have ran through corpses.
The stagnance was what stood out to me. You don't drink stagnant water.
No. Even
if you don't see rotting corpses in it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Even if there hasn't been a volcano. Even if there hasn't been a battle.
Yeah, I don't know if this was on purpose or not, but they really have depicted Isildur as kind of nasty. He's kind of a gross dude.
Yeah.
Like, he's not, like, personality-wise nasty. He just has some odd habits that really make me scratch my head. We get introduced, I think, I ask about this later, Estrid is introduced by sneak attacking Isildur.
Yep, Estrid.
She is very charming. I like the way that she stabbed him and is apologizing profusely, and there's a botched attempt to help.
And I really liked it that the show acknowledges that you should leave the knife in when you've been stabbed. So often I feel like this is entirely ignored in visual depictions where a stabbing occurs. You know, you pull out the arrow, you pull out the knife, and then you slap a tourniquet on it and move on because you're a tough guy.
Yeah, I think it does matter where you're stabbed, but it's better safe than sorry is the general advice that I think I've heard. Mm-hmm. Usually it's better to leave it in if you're not sure. If you're absolutely sure, you could take it out, but that's a big gamble.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think 9 times out of 10, because the theory is it stops you from actually bleeding as much.
Yeah.
There are some bandits. These end up becoming like a reoccurring kind of cast. Not these particular bandits, but the culture they're from. They were stopping and pretending to need help, which I noted that's like some serial killers did that. Ted Bundy did that. He pretended to have like a broken down car. I think personally pretending to need aid, like as a trap to lure in others, is super, like, just absolutely heinous.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. I thought the camera work for Arondir's action sequence felt like dancing. Mm-hmm. And I love this because I think that's the sensation, because I think that's a good sensation to use to depict an elf's fighting style. It
reminded me a lot of the choreography in the Darth Maul fight at the end of Star Wars Episode 1. Just the way they like danced around and choreographed their moves a lot. It's really what it made me think of, which is, I've learned, a derisive scene. Some people love it and some people think it's too flashy. I don't know where I stand on fancy, but it makes more sense for elves to me than other pieces of lore.
It just makes me feel like his fighting is a little bit artistic.
Yeah. I think this is when they announced it, but so after Arondir saves Isildur and Estrid, they head back to the runaways from the Southlands, and Bronwyn is dead. I think this is when they like announced it, right?
Yeah, they show her funeral pyre.
And I don't remember them mentioning it before. She was like one of my favorites. I was actually waiting because she wasn't around in episode 1 or 2 at all, or any of these characters.
Her actress quit between seasons 1 and 2.
I didn't notice this, but apparently Adar's did too. They changed actors for Adar. I didn't notice.
Yes, they did change actors for Adar. They did recast him, but they chose not to recast Bronwyn.
I guess maybe that says ultimately what they didn't have strong plans in any scenes she would have been in, would have been as strenuous or contemporaneous or extra anyway if they recasted her.
And she did have seeds burned into her shoulder that couldn't have helped her case.
Yeah, I'm guessing that was the cause, actually, the seeds.
You think that's what they wrote on Bronwyn's certificate of death?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wound seeds were the cause of death. She would have recovered otherwise. I'm very curious where the Southlanders who are fleeing Mordor are going to go now.
They're going to a place called Pelargir. It's a port city that is in what later becomes Gondor.
Okay, so they're just getting out of there, getting to a port?
It's a port city, founded by the Númenóreans in times gone by.
I wonder, they did mention that in the show, that it was an old Númenórean settlement. I think there was even like some splash text across the screen explaining it too.
Might be, yeah. The conversation that Isildur and Estrid have really moves me. The story that Isildur tells about his mom is really well delivered. The emotions are palpable.
Yeah, it was nice to see a little bit of characterization for Isildur, because even though I know him from the prologue, he hasn't really been much of a character up until this episode, really.
No, he's really only been a foil.
Later it does show, and I'm still not clear on this, so I'm going to ask it, is Theo, is he actually leaving, or is he tricking the bandits by pretending to join them?
I guess we'll have to watch and find out.
Okay, so we don't know yet. I thought he was supposed to be tricking them, but he kind of seemed a little more he was really good at acting, or, it's kind of like the best lies have some truth in them, because he seemed like he really did want to go after a while once the conversation was going on.
Well, Theo's a troubled kid,
Yeah, he lost his mom. He has a stepdad he doesn't like. He doesn't identify as a stepdad. It's the classic troubled youth stuff.
And I mean, there was a giant volcano eruption, and he's been displaced from his home, and
even before the volcano, there was the orcs.
Yeah,
classic troubled youth stuff.
Yeah. Orcs popping out of the floor.
Yeah,
Classic.
and volcanoes. Also, Estrid seemed like so suddenly established. I felt like she was somewhere before these 2 episodes, but that is revealed to not be the case. She was just introduced by stabbing Isildur.
Yep, and that's when we get to meet her character, but I like her a lot.
Yeah. They mentioned that she has a burned off sigil, so that could go either way. She could either be trying to infiltrate, but she could also just be like a former member of these forest bandits. I forget the name the show gave them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she burns the mark off herself, and at least to me, I feel like if Adar was looking to send people in to infiltrate, he just wouldn't mark them right away.
Yeah,
he hasn't exactly been in power very long to be marking people.
I think this goes to say a bit about allegiances and what we talked about earlier with like medieval ideas on oaths. Like if you swore yourself to something and then you break that oath, you're seen as still not trustworthy, even if you're breaking an oath to their enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that sort of thing did happen a lot, and you got to put yourself in the psychology of like they are either a traitor who still works for them and trying to backstab us, or they backstab their last allegiances and we don't want to be associated with them still.
It depends on how much of an oath that sigil carries.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one thing if it's like an oath versus like a compelled oath, stuff like that, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Or is there even any promise to ally with Adar? Just, is it more like I won't fight against you?
Well, so we kind of seen it in the last episode or the one before, 1 or 2, with Sauron. You have to kneel and swear allegiance to him, but it's at sword point.
Sauron didn't get marked.
Yeah, he did not get marked. That is true as well. And even I
feel like Sauron's oath was special.
Yeah, Sauron was a bit different. Also, outside of the logic from the characters, because Adar doesn't know Sauron. Sauron, I think, could probably just shapeshift away any marks or brands. He seems very fluid in how he can present himself anyway.
Yeah.
So it would be kind of like a non-starter, like thematically for the show to have him marked, because it really wouldn't mean much.
Mm-hmm.
It's still in universe, doesn't make sense why he didn't get marked. But I guess we could explain that away with he's just different because he's thought to be royalty, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so the treants, I said the treants at the end. I thought they were really cool. I like the depiction of the one with the flowers on it, the blossoming one. That's an Entwife. And then the treant speech reminded me a lot of something that another character we meet Tom Bombadil. They the way they talk, their manner of speaking reminded me a lot of each other. Next, we have our Numenor storyline. Yes. I had a lot to say about the implications of this that could have probably gone in a lot of different episodes, but this time it popped in my head while I was watching it. So this is where it is. This is where I ended up putting it. I will say it starts off with Muriel's father, right? Yeah. The king. At the funeral for Tar Palantir. Yes, Tar Palantir. He is deceased, and there is a lot of politicking going on. At first they try to keep some decorum, but it devolves really quickly. Yeah. It was very distasteful, I felt. But probably not inaccurate. No, probably not. I feel like, they should have just kept it to them. They could have waited till they were out of the room with the dead body, You mean sitting around a table at a institution for dining? Yeah, now that is much more... It's much more appropriate to decorum. You mentioned that later is not appropriate to discretion still, but I was thinking about during the scene about Queen Muriel again. I mentioned, well, I don't know if she's not actually queen, is it? She was about to be queen, as we saw later this episode. Queen Regent. Yeah, the Muriel, the Numenorians, their fate, all of that. I know that the kingdom is poised to fall, since this is a prequel and it's mentioned heavily in the films. And so the big question I'm pondering in my head to kind of keep, because some of these scenes are kind of hard to watch, I'm not going to lie. The Numenor plotline since season 1 and even now has been like the slow point of the show for me. But I do still pay attention because and do have this wonder about once this unfolds, what's going to happen to the Numenoreans specifically to make them fall? Who's to blame? Is it Muriel's fault for her mission to the Southlands and not listening to the dissent of her people? If that's the way this goes, it kind of is a metaphor for like rulers who go against the power and the will of the people they rule. I still do feel like bad for her, and it's hard to hold her accountable. I think Pharazôn and the I said like isolationist tendency of the Numenoreans, and he isn't like, I don't think Pharazôn actually believes any of that. He seems to just be riding that wave and that public image and stuff like that. He's noticing the trend and going with it. And their distrust for elves and the Southlanders and Middle Earth made it so that their society can't really handle the single failure of Muriel's mission, where if, everyone was behind her and had her back on this one failed mission, I don't think the downfall would have happened, if that makes sense. Like it would have been a bad mission and they lost a lot and they had heavy losses, but it's something that they could have recovered from.
There's far more to the downfall than what the show has shown so far.
Yeah.
I am absolutely convinced, even in this version of the telling.
There's more to there's more to the downfall that we won't see, or that I yet haven't seen.
That you haven't seen.
Okay.
It hasn't been addressed. I'm just assuming the show is going to do what the book says.
Yeah.
But there is so much more to the fall that we haven't gotten to from the lore.
Yeah. And so I know that it seems like this in the lore was covered pretty heavily compared to the rest of the materials, like in the Southlands and Sauron's exact movements and stuff. From our discussions, but I still feel like they have some blanks to fill in and questions that weren't answered from the text, is my understanding. Like
Numenor is not ready to fall yet.
Yeah, you can see since we've seen them pull up to Numenor, we knew it was going to fall, probably, or it's at least going to fall before the story picks back up. And now you can see the signs of it cracking very heavily,
My expectation is that Numenor will fall before the show is over.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But it still has a fair bit of time yet before it falls.
Mm-hmm. I will say, again, like looking at it, like Muriel's culpability and accountability as a leader, maybe she should be expected to be more prudent and account for this scheming. It's hard to say for me. But this is where my mind is when I'm watching this Numenorean train wreck unfold.
That's one way to describe it.
Yeah.
Well, I have 2 points about discretion.
Mm-hmm.
First, I noticed that Elendil has a lot of discretion in what to describe to Muriel when he's telling her what's unfolding, because, she's blind, she can't see, and he's describing what's happening around the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it struck me that it's just a huge loss in autonomy to have to trust someone to describe what's going on like that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I was thinking about what you were saying about blind leaders in Rome and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is very much like even people who aren't leaders who have to rely on a lot more people once they become disabled in such a way that they lose one of their senses, especially sight. Even in the modern day, but especially, before we had as much accessibility in society, you really had to trust your family or the people around you.
Yeah.
And to the point where like you really wouldn't be able to, like, the scene does a good job of showing like how hard it would be for a blind leader to lead. He had to explain just like where people were standing in the room and stuff.
Yeah, and whose ear someone had.
Yeah, exactly.
My other point about discretion is that I'm not sure I understand why Pharazôn would trust his son and his son's girlfriend to a treason table, or why he would permit himself to be associated with a treason table in the middle of a pub that the Navy frequents.
I didn't catch this while watching it, but I think this might even be on purpose to say, like, kind of how open the dissent is, Like, that he doesn't even feel that scared, really, to discuss it in the middle of a busy pub frequented by the military.
Yeah, I guess I'll roll with that because, believing that it's intended is
but
better than believing it's a mistake.
Yeah, it is still kind of definitely eyebrow raising. It's like, well, okay, you're just discussing overthrowing the government over like a dinner table in the middle of this busy place. Yeah, it's quite odd. It does show later in Numenor the ceremony for Muriel to be crowned. There is pretty quickly some protest about Muriel receiving the crown. I think so. At first, I put she handled it magnanimously, but she should have shot it down immediately. As things unfold, this kind of feels obvious, really. Although how much could she have too is another question. And Elendil's daughter is kind of spreading lies about how much she's relying on the Palantir, because the Palantir, as we saw in season 1, was part of the reason she didn't want to go to the Southlands. I mean, maybe it's lies is a bit of a stretch, but at least like unbased, unfounded assumptions.
She's telling tales.
Yeah, she's telling tales out of church.
And I mean, really, Aarion doesn't have much basis for precisely how Muriel's been using the Palantir. The fact that it's there and the fact that it's getting some use seem fairly true facts, but her drawing conclusions about precisely how it's being used seem ungrounded.
Like, I wonder how she and this faction that didn't want to go to the Southlands would have reacted to that's what the Palantir told her to do. Would they just say, are they more emphatic about staying home and said, well, in this case the Palantir was right, I don't mind it? Or would they not trust the Palantir so much that they would actually want to go against it? It's kind of hard to say. I also think that having Muriel be blind so she can only see using the Palantir is kind of another layer on top of the blind leader thing. Like, she can't see the physical world. All she can see is through this Palantir now. Like, that is something that probably really freaked the people out too, as much as like a blind leader can only be seen through their aide who could describe a room to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a really good point.
Yeah, Pharazôn also, he's very, very, very sly. He seems like he's on Muriel's side, but he's actually egging the crowd on when he says, she doesn't need that Palantir, get rid of it. I think he knew exactly how that was going to go down when he said that.
He totally did.
I was really good. Pharazôn's a really fun villain. Really like him. We've said this before.
Yeah, Pharazôn is politician through and through.
Mm-hmm. I don't get the end here with the eagle. Does the eagle actually favor Pharazôn? Is that what's going on? Because that's what the crowd assumed.
So I was confused by this the first time I saw it as well. What I get out of this now is that the eagle does not favor Pharazôn. Mm-hmm. I think the eagle seems anxious and unsure as the crowd is interpreting it that way. Yeah,
the eagle might have like literally been there to save Muriel from being destroyed by a crowd. Like,
I think the eagle was there to bless Muriel's rule.
Yeah.
And the eagle showed up, and then Pharazôn's friend started the Pharazôn chant, and Pharazôn backed it up. And as they're chanting Pharazôn and the eagle starts to look uncomfortable, the crowd continues to interpret the eagle's presence being an endorsement of Pharazôn, even though I think it demonstrably isn't.
Yeah. This goes a lot to say, I think, about how people interpret things. They just see what they want.
And what the influential people around them tell them it means.
Yeah. Also, I know that this is kind of been... We've covered this a few different times, I feel like, but can't the eagles talk sometimes?
Yes.
This eagle just didn't speak up. He didn't just say, hey, I like Muriel, or hey, I don't like Muriel. Could they not talk in all of the works of Tolkien too? I feel like this has been a thing.
The eagles talk in The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. And Gandalf reports conversations with the eagles in The Lord of the Rings.
In the books, right?
Yes.
Yes.
But Gandalf is reporting the conversations in The Lord of the Rings. Perhaps there's some, wizard language that, he can speak to eagles.
He can't speak with animals.
And maybe stuff in The Hobbit isn't as actually accurate. Maybe Bilbo embellished a little bit.
Yeah, that is always a fun frame for all of the Lord of the Rings, is that it's a story told by like the narrator, so that there may be some unreliable or biased or something like Bilbo explained what the eagles said, quote unquote, but they didn't literally say that with words.
Mm-hmm. We talked about this a little bit in our War of the Rohirrim special, where I said that I thought talking eagles could be pretty corny. And I think this would be one of those instances where I think it would be very bad on screen if the eagle said anything.
I think the eagle bellowing out "hey" and getting the crowd to be quiet would have been awesome. But I suppose that's down to taste.
And execution.
Yeah, and execution. Yeah. Our next topic, even though he had a good amount of screen time, I don't have many notes. Adar?
Well, the Adar storyline is kind of becoming more Southland storyline, and eventually it's going to go into the Eregion storyline. This might be the last time we have an Adar bullet point.
As his own subject, yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of getting absorbed into other plot lines.
Yeah, that happens a lot. The Numenor and the Southlands did that near the end of season 1, for example.
But then they split again.
I think he does pretty emphatically explain why he is stating Sauron is dead to one of the orcs. Basically, it's a lie, and he explicitly knows it to be false. He says there's some things that are for a father to worry about, or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. Because the orc directly questions him and says, hey, if we killed Sauron, why are you plotting to kill Sauron again, you know? And I feel like there was some questions about it in the first season, why he keeps explaining Sauron is dead and stuff like that. He knows that he's not dead. The only discrepancy, he was telling this to Galadriel and, well, Sauron, actually, but...
Yeah. He was informing Sauron that Sauron was dead.
Yeah. But I feel like he's selling the propaganda. He doesn't believe it, though. Like, he knows Sauron's alive. Mm-hmm. And he might have been like me. He didn't know he came back the next day as a bunch of worms. I thought, maybe like the stranger was Sauron and he had to like come from another plane again and fall back onto Earth, or he could incarnate in a different person after he gained enough power. Another one of his followers, like Waldrig or something, could become a vessel for Sauron or something. I really had a bunch of ideas before the Halbrand reveal about how Sauron was going to get to Middle Earth. Mm-hmm. But he was just there.
Might have been a meteor.
Yeah. Originally it was a meteor, but it seems like after he gets killed, he comes back pretty quickly with a bunch of worms, right?
I mean,
as far as we know.
Upon rewatching the flashback, I don't think there's any time stated or implied about the rebodying. There's several times the screen just completely goes black.
Yeah.
And at least I imagine that, there's a few centuries every time the screen is going black, maybe a millennium here and there.
So the only thing about that, this is probably discussion for the last episode, but I want to cover it, is that once he does reform, the orcs are there attacking. Like, to me, it would make sense if they killed their old boss and their new boss immediately goes and attacks the Southlands, and then the people start fleeing. I guess it doesn't have to go that way, though. I
just figured that Adar and the orcs took a while to make this master plan come to fruition.
I feel like, since it's a soft magic system, sometimes Sauron reforming could be literally a few hours, and sometimes it could be a few centuries or millennia. And I feel like this time it was closer to a couple of months at most, though, this last time he reformed, personally. But the point is, Adar, and the reason I'm bringing this up, wouldn't really know how long or how Sauron would reform. Because I don't think it's really a hard and fast rule.
And the ambiguity that the show has allows us each to interpret it how we like it. Mm-hmm. So, in our Khazad-dûm storyline...
Mm-hmm. So, Durin ends up meeting with Sauron in disguise with Celebrimbor. He immediately has suspicions. I like that he is... kind of picking up that this Sauron in disguise, I forget the exact name he's using.
Anatar.
He doesn't trust this Anatar story right away. It's kind of refreshing to have somebody suspect him right off the bat. And Durin's a good character. He's a skeptical guy, He's always kind of like that.
Yeah, and Durin sees through it, even though Sauron, through Celebrimbor, is offering the dwarves exactly what they need to solve their problem. Mm-hmm. And there Sauron goes, deceiving again, manipulating.
Yeah, and it ends up working because Diza is there. Diza's her name, right?
Yeah, Disa's Durin's wife.
Yeah, and she kind of buys it against Durin's better judgment. There is, during the scene, they say a slow drip splits the boulder, which I feel like Sauron is very contrary to that. A slow drip, first of all, being like a small thing splitting a boulder, and also like having to be patient and waiting for small things to pay off.
I think Sauron can be patient, but yes, I agree about the small things aspect of it.
I think he can be patient, but he doesn't like it's not just the small things too. It's more like the being patient, like the way he is patient. He doesn't mind waiting for something to be triggered, but like it happens all at once, you know. Like he sets out some magic items that will be discovered, you know. I don't have a specific example, but he seems like the type to like leave a magic sword hilt or something. Yeah, there we go. And like it like will all of a sudden, you know, become relevant and create a volcano. Like it's not going to be a small drip, you know. It's going to be like a trigger that creates a large, big difference. He seems to move in that sort of way.
Yeah, but eventually you're going to get that final drip that breaks the boulder, and then something big happens.
I do like the slow drip splits the boulder though.
Yeah,
just it is a very nice and very dwarvish feeling metaphor. Unlike my friend is drowning.
I liked Prince Durin's apology. I thought he gave a good apology. And then I liked the advice he gave after as well. Mm-hmm. Just like the elves might need to accept their fating, I thought it was some really good perspective that Durin proposed that perhaps the dwarves should just accept that they need to move above ground for a while.
Yeah, which is interesting because Prince Durin says, you know, hey, I disagreed with you when you said this about the elves, but maybe we should apply this advice to us. And then the king also is kind of saying, I didn't think we should do this for the elves. Like they're both being hypocritical, just in the opposite way. But the difference is King Durin's being self-serving, and Prince Durin he's being outwardly generous to the elves who need help, and inwardly harsh and accepting of fate for themselves, which is much better. It's still hypocritical though in a way, but it's much better to kind of say we need to accept our fate, but we need to help them, rather than the other way around saying they need to accept their fate, but we need to make sure we need to help ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Just occurred to me that this is kind of parallel to Elrond and Gil-galad. Remember when Gil-galad gives the advice to Elrond about hope, and Elrond's like, no, because you're actually wrong about how hope works, and then Elrond turns it back on him later on. Yeah,
there's a lot of twisting of words, like in throwing what you said in your face in the show when the leaders are discussing what they're going to do a lot. But yeah,
but Gil-galad actually listens to Elrond's good interpretation of what he had said earlier. King Durin is not listening to the interpretation of what he said earlier. I don't know
if it's just down to delivery and how the character is depicted, because objectively I feel like King Durin makes worse choices than King Gil-galad, but I like King Durin better, and I feel more empathetic to his choices than a lot of Gil-galad's.
I agree, yeah.
But on paper, King Durin is not batting 100 here. He's like what, 0-2, I think, at least. I mean, disowning his son too, so that's another strike for him. He's just like not, and every time he makes a bad choice, I completely emphasize, but it's still the wrong choice, you know.
Yeah.
Like both morally and like objectively too. It ends up harming them in the end. The only thing is, I don't know if it was the wrong choice to say no to the elves. That, like, you know, Prince Durin's saying now. Like, I feel like if you were to say the elves need to just accept their fate and leave, maybe that would have worked out for the best. I mean, that's what Elrond's saying after all, too. But again, like, saying that about somebody else is different than saying it about yourself, too.
And when you have said it about someone else, that very much increases the necessity that you say it about yourself.
Yeah, that you don't be hypocritical. Exactly.
Yeah. I don't think King Durin was necessarily wrong in his decision about the elves, but that makes his non-acceptance of fate now for them that much worse.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it is very, like, it's very hard to say because, you know, in real life there isn't magic, but and it's harder to know fate than I feel like it is in Middle Earth too, but like it's hard to say when to accept something and when to fight it, you know. like on a metaphysical or spiritual sense, especially.
It's definitely difficult, yeah.
And I don't fault King Durin for messing up, even though he does it every time.
Well, moving on to Celebrimbor in Eregion.
Mm-hmm.
I love the look on Sauron's face when Celebrimbor says he's going to lie to Gil-galad. When he says, I'm going to tell him that we have closed up the forge and we're going to keep forging rings. The look on Sauron's face says, wait, getting Celebrimbor to do that was even an option? I wouldn't even have sunk that low yet.
Yeah, I know. And Celebrimbor too also has like a face like a like excited like primary school kid like getting ready to, I don't know, like get into trouble. Like he like has such an innocently mischievous face despite doing something so horrible.
Yeah. And Sauron's just sitting there thinking like, I didn't even know that I could tempt him to do this.
Yeah, I know. It was pretty good stuff. I feel kind of bad for Celebrimbor because he really is like so earnestly thinking he's doing the right thing and he's being deceived, you know.
Does he really think he's doing the right thing, though? He's lying to his king. Can you think you're doing the right thing when you're lying to your king? I'm
going to go with yes. Because, like, Durin lies to his king, and I know it ends up being a bad decision, too, but to save the elves, and I'm not saying Prince Durin is faultless, and I think that was... Maybe it's just because I don't like Gil-galad. Like, I feel like you can lie to him because I don't like him, which maybe isn't... metaphysically morally justifiable, but I don't like Gil-galad. Like, he gives me the willies.
I agree with your personal assessment of Gil-galad, but I don't think that justifies Celebrimbor's lying to his king.
No, I suppose it doesn't, but I get the temptation to lie to such a jerk, you know. I'm just saying I really, this season 2, everything happened to Celebrimbor. I feel bad for him, and I feel like I would so easily fall into every trap he's falling into. Like, more than any of the other characters, I really emphasize with how much evil he's doing unintentionally, because I don't see any way he couldn't, like, with everything going on. I know that can be said true of, like, literally everybody, but it's you know, one thing to see Celebrimbor fall for evil and then, like, say, Waldreg fall for evil, even though technically if I was in Waldreg's shoes, I'd make the same decisions, too. That's how that works, but Celebrimbor I just relate to more, I guess, in this season.
Yeah. Celebrimbor's fault is his ego and his pride in his work, his craftsmanship.
Yeah, that's true. But like also the way that Sauron uses that to kind of say like other people don't respect you, you know, and you need to stand up for the pride in your work and stuff. And he's like, it's very sounds like motivational and like, yeah, I need to be reassured like that. And Celebrimbor really probably just needed to be like reassured from the people who aren't trying to deceive and manipulate him, and he would have been insulated from this avenue of attack from Sauron. He would have had to figure out another way to manipulate him.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, but maybe not. It's hard to say. I mean, like, it's kind of like maybe pride's like a fire, and if you feed it, it only gets bigger, and then it's easier to use to hurt him too. I don't know.
I think that's more how things work in Lord of the Rings.
Probably. I don't know. It's hard to say. I maybe we'll see as more goes on, but in Celebrimbor, you know, everyone does say the best about his work. You know, the Gil-galad and Elrond all highly respect him. So maybe my read's bad, but he just comes off to me like somebody who just needed some reassurance and got it from somebody who's using him to an evil purpose. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to watch, and I could see how you could fall into something like that. I said 9 here, but I thought it was kind of funny that even though it's 7, that the reason that there are 7 dwarven rings is because the forge is an oddly specific shape that makes exactly 7. I thought like it was kind of weird. Like, wouldn't they just have like one like mold and make 7 of them from that one mold? You would think.
Maybe there's some magic in bringing all 7 into existence at the same time.
That's probably what they're going for, but it just doesn't seem like it makes sense on a logistical level to make them that way.
But this sounds like magical influence to me.
Yeah.
Like you have to bring all of the set together at the same time, or they don't have some connection or some significance.
Now I'm thinking about it, they did do that with the 3 rings too, didn't they?
Yeah.
And it looked a little bit less silly to me with the 3 rings than the 7 rings, but I don't know. It looked a little odd to me.
Okay. I'm totally fine with this choice. I like it.
Yeah.
I also really like the sinister chanting that happens as Sauron is touching the mithril.
Yeah. I still am holding out that mithril has some sort of enchanting quality to it.
I'm watching for it.
I have the feeling that it does. And even though, just jump back also, I still want, and I know we kind of delved into this multiple times, but the numbers for the rings really just, I really want to do some sort of dive into why, but the answer is just because those are all numbers Tolkien just went with, right? Because of mythological reasons.
We can speculate about numbers of perfection and things like that, but fundamentally, as far as I know, it's just numbers he chose.
Yeah.
What he was thinking or why he chose them is just entirely speculation. There's a record of the different drafts he went through where he switches up the numbers for things.
Oh, does he? Okay. So there's...
But why he settled on the numbers he settled on, I don't know is ever specified or explained.
Yeah, and the fact that he apparently in the drafts, as you just said, changed them makes me wonder, does that just mean that they could have been any number and he was just doing a placeholder? But then, like, why would he decide to settle on a different number then if it was just a number before, you know? It makes me really curious about it. I don't know why this is so interesting to me either, but it really makes me feel like there's something hidden about the 7 dwarven rings in the lore that's important about why there are 7.
I really like the numbers of perfection explanation myself, but that's just my personal bias there.
I think what is finally going to put this to bed for me, what's going to scratch the itch, is if I find out like you know how there was 9 rings and then there were 9 people in the Fellowship of the Ring and stuff like that.
Yes.
Like something like that, where it's like there's 7 dwarven rings and then 7 something else to at a later time.
So specifically, I can explain the 9 rings for men and the 9 walkers because those are directly connected in the plot.
Yeah.
Elrond specifically creates a fellowship with 9 members in it to oppose the 9 ring wraiths, and there are 9 ring wraiths because there are 9 rings.
Yeah, so that is something that really scratches the 9 for me there. Like why there are 9 people in the fellowship is because there are 9 rings, but I just want that to happen with the other ring numbers too somehow. I don't know how exactly, but that really was satisfying to me. And that, like, hypothetically, even though it never happens, if the 9 members of the fellowship faced off against the 9 ring wraiths, it would be a 1v1, you know, like they would each have 1 wraith to square off against, you know?
Yep.
Which, I like that. I like that a lot. Satisfying. But I don't know if I'll ever get the closure I need on these ring numbers, ultimately.
We'll just have to keep investigating.
Yeah. It'll be really exciting when it pays off when we're reading the Silmarillion and I find somehow the 7 dwarven rings matter.
Well, next up we have Galadriel, Elrond, the Lindon storyline as they're trucking on their journey. Yeah,
so I feel like a lot happened in this episode and last episode. Well, Elrond and Galadriel were even still just getting ready to go. Like, Durin goes to Celebrimbor and Eregion and then back, and I understand geography and stuff. He's supposed to be closer, but it's just like it feels like he went there and then back home and then there again before they even left. It's like they took forever to get going. All of the stuff that Sauron manages to pull with Celebrimbor, like he makes him wait outside for a few days, you know, like, and I also get that they sent a messenger ahead, so they think that they have more time than they do. But it just felt like, and there was a lot of debate about what they're going to do. But at the end of the day, it felt like Gil-galad, Elrond, Galadriel should have been a little bit more expedient in sending somebody to Celebrimbor. Also, a third thing is they're elves, so of course they're bad at doing anything quickly.
Except building a forge by spring.
Yeah, that needed to be done. Well, also, just to mention, that kind of got explained a lot, huh, with the leaves falling and stuff like that, and the forge being for the rings.
Yeah.
Elrond, in this episode, his demeanor is so much darker than he has been for the rest of the show.
Yeah, he kind of goes too far.
He disregards Galadriel's thoughts and opinions while she's wielding a magical premonition device, I think is kind of wild. Even though, like, he doesn't trust the ring, he should be able to trust Galadriel. It felt pretty crappy of him to or quite. It was rude of him to dismiss her so emphatically.
I agree he goes too far. I get where he's coming from, though, that he is entertaining the idea that since Galadriel is trusting the ring, then she becomes suspect herself.
Yeah.
But I agree, he goes too far. I'm not trying to defend him. I'm just trying to see where he's coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, I do get not trusting the rings, and like he's really figuring out where Galadriel is in the ring. Galadriel starts and the ring ends, since it's all coming from Galadriel, you know? I get that, too. They end up fighting some wraiths, which I wanted to ask you about.
So these are Barrow-wights. Okay. They do show up in the book, in the Lord of the Rings book. Mm-hmm. But Elrond and Galadriel never have a face-off with them. This is something Rings of Power is bringing in. But the existence of Barrow-wights in this particular geographic location-ish is something that exists in Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. And the Barrow-wights are linked to Tom Bombadil.
Okay.
It is not an accident that the Barrow-wights and Tom Bombadil show up in the same episodes together, because those two ideas are directly linked in the book.
Got it. Okay. So these aren't wraiths, because those couldn't exist yet, because the wraiths are the 9 men, the rings for men, right? All the wraiths that we see.
They're not ring wraiths. It depends on how you define wraith. The Barrow-wights, properly speaking in the book, are actually reanimated corpses.
Oh. They looked pretty ethereal for reanimated corpses.
Well, like I said, properly in the book.
Yeah.
They're
okay.
They're reanimated corpses. There are spirits that the Witch King has commanded to go into these corpses in the barrows that have reanimated the corpses.
Yeah. Either way, they were kind of cool enemies. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't like just throwing kind of ghostly looking things in there without any sort of proper explanation from the lore.
It's definitely drawing on stuff from the Fellowship of the Ring, but it's doing a lot of adaptation and riffing on some stuff.
Yeah.
There's definitely some lore problems with having them here at this point and stuff like that.
Oh, is there?
But it's not stuff that I particularly care about. It has to do with chronology of parsing exactly who was where, when, and could do things.
And, well, you said they're connected to Tom Bombadil somehow, too, and he's clearly somewhere else.
Tom Bombadil and the Barrow-wights in the book are geographically next to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't seem to be currently in the show.
Tom Bombadil isn't supposed to be out in Rune in the time of Lord of the Rings.
Got it. There is a scene after they're in the fight, Galadriel speaking on like being able to see the future and her fears coming true. It was very scary, very sad to hear. Yeah,
and it's conversations like this that remind me of what we talked about like the algorithm and stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff like whether to use the Elven rings or not feels a lot like whether you use algorithms and social media or not. It leaves you wondering whether it deceives you or guides you, whether the costs are too great, even if using these sorts of tools is not inherently wrong.
I wish that having social media dependency and issues was as cool as having a magical ring, though.
I mean, it kind of is.
Yeah, if you abstract it, I mean, you have unlimited information at your fingertips, you know.
The internet is, like you say, unlimited information. It's the greater body of everything that humanity has done that we've uploaded to the internet anyway. But we've uploaded a lot.
Well, I'll say that the index and archiving of it has seriously taken a very bad turn in the last, 5 or 6 years. I think we discussed this on our, like Googling something 10 or 15 years ago was you got so much more helpful links, and now it's so hard to find helpful information. It really saddens me. It's like we lived in such a beautiful time for like 5 to 10 years where you could look up anything and find really helpful information, and I fear that we don't live in that time anymore.
Yeah.
Which I wonder if that has something to say about your metaphor in the Unholy Trinity and the corrupting influence of Sauron.
Yeah, and also how things decline over time.
Yeah, and like the Elven rings and their first creation and inception in this telling seem like they were suspect, but like it would make sense to me to have them be genuinely good until Sauron, or in this metaphor, like commercialization over function of the internet, right?
Yeah, exactly. I like that application a lot.
So I feel like maybe also in a general picture that if Saruman is always our industrialization call, I feel like Sauron might be like akin to like advertising or salesmanship, or like
Absolutely.
like with the deceitful nature and edge to it, like in like he also seems to have a very exchange oriented mindset where he's like, what can I get and give,
He's your used car salesman.
Yeah, he's the used car salesman, but like with god powers.
Yep.
So I feel like in those two together, the commercialization and then the industrialization really are great at having the two aspects of modern society and the fall of it. And maybe one without the other wouldn't be so bad. Well, like arguably, like Saruman wouldn't be as bad without Sauron, maybe.
I mean, you'd only have one enemy.
Right, yeah. And like you said, with the unholy trinity reinforcing each other, so maybe some of these things on their own wouldn't be so bad, but like they're kind of so they're
linked.
They're linked to the point where they can't be untangled and you can't separate them out, is kind of like your whole point, right?
Yeah.
It's messy. There's so many connections that it's hard to tell where one thing starts and ends with
exactly.
the unholy trinity or stuff like industrialization and commercialization.
Yeah.
That being said, back to Elrond and Galadriel, when they're during this ambush, they kind of decide to leave Galadriel behind. There's an elf that gets like hit and they have to like cover his mouth and kind of have him cry, and it was very sad to see when the orcs attack them after they fight the whites, right?
Yeah.
Galadriel giving the ring to Elrond reminds me of Frodo asking Galadriel to take the One Ring in this scene.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting parallel. Galadriel actually does give the ring to Elrond as opposed to Frodo ending up not giving the ring to Galadriel because Galadriel turns it down.
Yeah.
Elrond is not successful in his refusal of the ring.
I feel like Galadriel, almost when Frodo offered this, like probably thought of this exact moment, if we're assuming these are all the same canon, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see that.
And
I like that.
Like it just very much reminded me of it. And like I think that might have been on purpose by the direct, not that it really matters, but like just the way it was shot reminded me a lot of it.
Yeah, I like this interpretation.
I didn't notice this. Elrond pointed out it was very like wise, but like everyone's like, wow, Galadriel stayed behind to save everyone. He's like, no, she stayed behind to save the ring, not our lives. Like, I don't know if that's true, but it's a very, and it kind of shows how dark his mind is, but I thought it was a very interesting way to reframe her noble sacrifice.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting, and I'm glad it happened in the show, but I think this is an example of Elrond going too far.
Yeah, I don't think it's true, but I think that even that it was said, I wouldn't have thought of it that way, and I wouldn't have been able to, but it is a solid interpretation,
Yeah, but he has decided that he's going to interpret whatever happens to support his thesis that Galadriel is no longer trustworthy because of the ring.
And I think that it's kind of like I was saying before, where it's linked, and Galadriel might have been doing both. He might have there might be some truth to what he says, even if she also cared to save her friends' lives.
And that's a great point as well. It can be both.
And like ultimately, it doesn't matter like which one. I think honestly, though, my reading of Galadriel, obviously, she would have, even if she couldn't have saved the ring but saved her friends, she would have too.
Yeah, to say that it was only to save the ring, to say that she was not trying to save her friends, is completely unfair.
Yeah.
And I like your point that it can be both. She was trying to save the ring. If she wasn't trying to save the ring, she wouldn't have given it to them.
Exactly.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that was her goal.
Yeah, and if it were different and she did I still feel like if she had to choose between leaving the ring behind or leaving her friends behind, she would have left the ring over leaving her friends. It would have been a hard choice for her, but I don't, this isn't the One Ring. She's not corrupted and ready to let her friends die for it. I don't see that in her character, even though Elrond might. because he's very much more distrusting. Elrond is pretty wise, though, so maybe there is something to be said, like I said, but like you said, he's taking it too far.
If, in this hypothetical scenario, Galadriel chose to save the ring over her friends, I think that would tell us more about the sketchy Galadriel we've seen for the last season and a half than about the power of the ring. Because like you said, this is not the One Ring. This is not a corrupting ring.
Yeah, the only corrupting influence the ring has is like through old-fashioned, it makes you powerful, and power corrupts, you know?
Yeah, and we've seen some questionable stuff from Galadriel before the ring was ever a question.
Yeah.
So if she chose the ring over her friends, I would say that says more about the core of who Galadriel is as a person in this story than about the ring.
Almost like way back even in episode 1 when she's hunting for Sauron in those Arctic wastes and she's being callous with the lives of her the people under her, you know.
Exactly.
But I just think that isn't who she is really as much anymore too. I feel like we're starting to see some character growth from her as well.
Mm-hmm.
I do not like that she had a bow because I she seems like a sword fighter and she is also fighting extremely close with the bow. It just bugged me. I get that the elves are like it gave her a chance to jump around and be graceful like you like, but she's only been seen fighting with a sword. Why is she fighting at close range? I just didn't like it.
Yeah, this fighting scene was not my favorite.
Maybe it's not where my mind was supposed to go. I was supposed to be more concerned about her sacrifice, but I was concerned with her weapon choice. It didn't make sense.
Well, they should choose the right weapon for viewers like you.
I didn't notice, if she didn't have a sword and it's all she had, then okay, it's cool showing her make use of the resources that she had in an opportune situation.
It wasn't a plot point, I don't think.
No, but like, at that point, why not just give her a sword? I don't know.
I don't know.
The last section is we get to see the Harfoots again.
Yes.
And I was very excited to see non-Harfoot hobbit cultures. We start off by meeting these desert hobbits.
The Stewards.
Yes. They cut to this dark mage. He's announcing that he's going to go after the stranger and his minions should go after the stranger's minions. And I was sitting there wondering like why that's not what they were doing from the start. Like right as he said he's going to do that. Like when he said I'm going to go after the Astari because you guys can't handle it. It's like, why wasn't that the plan from the get-go? You know, it makes sense, but like, what were you guys doing before?
I don't know. Trying to convince the stranger to join them directly.
Yeah. Because
they thought he was Sauron.
Yeah. We meet Tom Bombadil. I've heard of him. Before he said his name was Tom Bombadil, I was wondering if this was Radagast from The Hobbits.
I can see the similarity between the two conceptions of character.
The stranger says to him, "What are you?" Like to Tom Bombadil, and I also want to know what he is.
I remember the stranger asking, "Who are you?"
He doesn't say "What are you" to Tom Bombadil.
He might say "What are you?"
After he says "I'm Tom Bombadil," later on he's like doing magic and shooting fire around and mentioning that the stranger's an Astari, and then the stranger asks Tom Bombadil, "What are you?" Eventually,
I'll have to give it a rewatch and pay close attention. "Who are you?" is a very poignant question when the hobbits are encountering Tom Bombadil in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to know who and what this guy is. I feel like I'm going to get some more answers once we read the books, though.
Yeah, definitely. And we're not done with Tom Bombadil for this season yet, so you'll get to see a little bit more of him yet.
Yeah. During this segment, the dark wizard guy here, the dark mage hunting the stranger and the hobbits, he just does not fit Saruman the White. There was a dialogue at the end. I wish I expanded more on this note, but there was something that I'm going to put my chips on the table. This is not Saruman.
Okay.
And it was something to do with near the end of episode 4. He said something that I felt like I could safely deduce it wasn't him. Mentioning, oh man, I might have to cover in an appendix exactly what he said and why I was so strongly convinced. But there was something near the end of this episode that I definitely remember thinking, oh, there's no way that's Saruman. I think it had something to do with geography or other wizards or something like that even. But I'm going to leave it at that because I didn't write down the specifics and it's not coming to me in the moment.
I don't remember offhand.
Either way, I am going to put the important thing is I am going to put, if I had money, which I don't, I would put money that he's not Saruman. And after that, also they mentioned the walking song. I thought I would note that down. That's the last thing I have to say about the Harfoots, though.
Yep.
Even more so ingrained in the plot.
Well, that does it for our rings. Let's do our things. So for our Wizard's Wisdom, what were your favorite quotes?
Tom Bombadil said to the stranger, he said, "Great deeds are left to the hands they were placed in," which I really like.
What did you like about this one?
It's just the attitude of it is, in the context, he's saying, like, that is something I'm capable of, but not interested in. And I really like that kind of attitude and worldview.
Yep.
And it fits a lot of the themes of Lord of the Rings, too, because destroying the ring again, like, literally, Frodo has to, because, and Bilbo, to an extent, has to be, rope Frodo in destroying the One Ring, because that was the great deed that was left in their hands, you know? They were the ones who had to do it. It was left to them, you know?
Yeah.
It fits a lot of the themes of the universe, Middle-earth.
Mm-hmm.
I also mentioned this one is not based off of at all like the verbiage or anything, but I thought it was an interesting look into Esther's character. She says, "Forgiveness doesn't come to folk like me." And kind of our discussion about the burned off tattoo and stuff like that, and kind of being a victim of circumstance. I thought it was really good for her character.
Yeah. I like the forgiveness in the folk alliterating, and her use of the word folk makes me perceive her parochialness a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Like a bit of sage, but lowly earthen wisdom from like a peasant.
Yeah, it's a little bit more like what I'd expect Sam to say.
Yeah.
My favorite quote was from Winterbloom, the Entwife. She said, "There was an army of them, maiming and murdering as they marched. The spilling sap and burning branch called us from afar." And I'm selecting this for the alliteration.
Yeah.
Maiming, murdering, marched, spilling sap, and burning branch.
Yeah, the tree incident wives always have such a way with words.
Yeah, so that brings us to our language, lore, and letters. This will be our final entry on letter 210.
And that's just just to summarize it, a letter from Tolkien to a scriptwriter, right?
It's to someone else about the Zimmerman script.
Oh, got it. Yeah. So he was talking to somebody else about a script.
Yeah.
Got it.
So earlier on, we skipped a paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
We skipped paragraph 7 about Tom Bombadil. And we saved it for this episode because there was Tom Bombadil in the episode.
Yeah.
You had no idea who this guy was before you watched these episodes. It would have been hard to talk about this paragraph without any basis for him.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have gotten it at all. I still don't get it. Okay, so Tom Bombadil seems like he's very important, and I just barely met him. I know that he's in the books, but not in the movies, is about all I know about him.
Well, I will let you be the judge of how important he is when we get to him. But in the letter, Tolkien immediately takes offense to calling Tom the owner of the woods. Mm-hmm. The script calls him the owner. The Lord of the Rings book is very emphatic about the fact that the Old Forest does not belong to Tom, but rather Tom is the master. In the book, I believe it's Frodo says something about, so all this belongs to him, him being Tom Bombadil. And Goldberry, Tom's wife, says something like, "Oh no, that would be a terrible burden. He is the master." I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
So like, it's a big point in the book that Tom is not the owner of the woods. I spend a lot of time actually reflecting on what the word master might mean in relation to concepts such as ownership, power, domination, authority, compulsion, persuasion, and compliance. These are all themes that someday I want to do a full analysis on the legendarium and try to detect patterns to determine precisely what mastery of something, what being a master means in Lord of the Rings language.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. But
So there is some interesting parallels between being like a master of something and like having, as you said, like mastery of a skill too, that I didn't even connect till you just use that term in that way. It's kind of a pun if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like he's the master of the woods, like you can be the master of an instrument, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I think specifically when I read this, I thought of medieval vassalage and the concept of serfdom. You know, serfs were tied to the land, that nobles owned the land, and they were masters of the serfs, but not owners of the serfs, you know, of the people living on the land.
Yeah. And I'm sure this is going to be an important concept if and when I ever do this analysis on these concepts, because there's distinct parallels between that and the mastery that Frodo has over Sam.
Got it.
Sam calls Frodo master regularly, and I would think it's not a far stretch at all to start thinking about medieval vassalage in that context.
Yeah.
But this is only one sliver of what mastery means in the Legendarium.
Yeah.
It's an important sliver, and there's more to the concept to try to generalize what true mastery really is.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of different things, and people mean different things when they say it too. Like sometimes, like, you know, the owners of slaves were called masters to the slaves, and they did own them. So sometimes you do own something and are its master. Sometimes you're its master and you don't own it, like the medieval vassals and serfs.
My theoretical analysis one day is going to be less concerned with use of the word master in the primary world, and more concerned with teasing out what the Legendarium means by master.
So as far as I understand, though, Tolkien does reflect a lot of the language he uses with older uses of words. Though.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know, the contemporary use of what we might think of when we hear master might not make sense, is what you're saying, though,
yes, right?
But there still is like a logic that connects it to the real world. Otherwise, he would just use a completely made-up term or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
But the due to time and Tolkien's knowledge of Old English, the connection might be less one-to-one than what you might expect, right?
And he might be building his own definition of it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Tolkien definitely liked to play around with words. More than anything else, that man liked his words.
Definitely. Well, he not only liked his words, he really liked his trees. Quote, "I have already suspected Zimmerman of not being interested in trees." What a dox.
Yeah, I know. That is like scathing coming from Tolkien.
Yeah.
If he's ever said I wasn't interested in trees, even if it was true, it would hurt a lot worse than a lot of other things that people could say to me.
At several points, the depiction of Rohan is displeasing to Tolkien. As a professor of Old English and Old Norse literature, he had an idea of the historical situation, and when Zimmerman deviates from the Anglo-Saxon inspiration for Rohan, Tolkien gets annoyed. Yeah,
I really liked that, specifically about the chambers and having privacy. I thought that was super interesting because in the medieval times, it was very uncommon for even or earlier than medieval, like if we're talking like Anglo-Saxon, like people like just slept in a big communal hall. And I remember the New Line Cinema movies actually depicts this, I think, in one of the scenes in the second movie, The Two Towers. They are all sleeping pretty much in a big hall after a party.
Yeah. First of all, the letter talks about how the script had Theoden go to his chambers and stuff like that, and Tolkien was objecting to this because they didn't have chambers, like you said, back in those days. The New Line Cinema movies has a couple scenes, actually. I can remember one where Éowyn is sleeping out in the main hall. Yeah,
she's like, I think for me when I first watched that, before I had gotten my historical lenses out, it looked like she just like passed out from partying too hard was my first impression, I remember.
I also remember a scene where Theodred is dying in some private chambers.
Royalty did, if anybody had private chambers, that's what they did. But it was very common to communally sleep with strangers and people you didn't know all the time back then. It was very much different than how we conceive bedrooms and sleep.
Yeah. It's a very interesting cultural shift.
Yeah. In fact, some people thought sleeping alone was, or only with one other person, would be suspicious, like you're up to devilry or something.
Or other things. Well, Tolkien suggests that the Battle of Helm's Deep could be cut from the script rather than short the Ents their screen time. He really, really likes these trees.
Yeah, and I do like the idea of doing one thing well instead of two things poorly.
Yeah.
Although Helm's Deep, the Battle of Helm's Deep was honestly one of my favorite parts of the New Line Cinema movies, so cutting that would have hurt.
Yeah, it would have. It's interesting to know Tolkien's priorities.
Well, I also see the point he says where it's more secondary to the main plot than the battle with Merry and Pippin and the Ents. I do agree with that. But I feel like either one really could have probably actually happened off screen while the other one was on screen, and Helm's Deep was way cooler to me personally. But Tolkien and his trees, I can't argue with it.
Mm-hmm. Zimmerman likes to change small details, like having Merry and Pippin eat submarine sandwiches at Isengard.
I thought of like Scooby-Doo with that.
And Tolkien doesn't see the point of changes like these. Of course, I don't have access to the entire Zimmerman script, so I can't say that I see the point of them either. Mm-hmm. I will say that with the reams of problems that Tolkien has with the script, I do not believe that there is some hidden genius where the subs are a wonderful choice.
In the New Line Cinema movie, though, doesn't it have Merry and Pippin raid a larder after the Isengard battle?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like I thought it was kind of funny that made it through from this other abandoned script, this criticism Tolkien didn't like. He said they weren't eating sandwiches, they were resting and one was smoking, but like oversized sub sandwiches, I think he even said like oversized submarine sandwiches, like is just absolutely corny. Yeah.
And Merry and Pippin do find a larder stock that they do raid in the book.
Oh, okay. So
it's literally just the submarine sandwiches that Tolkien is objecting to, and the fact that like one wasn't sleeping and one wasn't smoking.
Yeah, got it. Which I could totally see it being an issue.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things like, why would Zimmerman change it?
Right, yeah.
Like, what was wrong with the original? Exactly.
Yeah.
So, the Zimmerman script describes Saruman's voice as hypnotic. Mm-hmm. And I agree that this misses the point exactly as much as Tolkien says it does. Quote, Saruman's voice was not hypnotic, but persuasive. Those who listened to him were not in danger of falling into a trance, but of agreeing with his arguments when fully awake. It was always open to one to reject, by free will and reason, both his voice while speaking and its after impressions. Saruman corrupted the reasoning powers. End quote. Mm-hmm. So, what I see is that the evils of industrialization appeal to reason through persuasion, not overriding free will through hypnosis.
Yeah, so a couple of things. My first point on it is it feels like that Theoden, it was more than just reason that had him under... I mean, it was Wormtongue's spell, but Wormtongue was an agent of Saruman. But I feel like he definitely had some sort of enchantment, sort of dulling his senses at least, if not seeming slightly hypnotic.
In the New Line Cinema movies, that is absolutely the case. There's like a full exorcism scene, whereas a key difference in the book is that basically Gandalf shows up to Edoras and says, Theoden, how about you come outside and get some sun and some vitamin D, and we're going to fix your depression.
I kind of remember talking about that when we watched The Two Towers.
Yeah.
I also wanted to know, is this how Tolkien intended all of the evils that corrupted Middle-earth to be seen, like Sauron and the One Ring, or is this just Saruman specifically, do you think?
I think this is more unique to Saruman, because Sauron is definitely all about overriding free will.
Yeah, and so a more hypnotic stance would make sense. And a lot of the depictions of the ring, especially the New Line Cinema, but some of what I've heard from the book, seems like it does kind of corrupt your will. But then again, there is that, I heard when we talked about Boromir's corruption, like he is using reason, as he's becoming corrupted by the ring before he turns on Frodo.
But I don't know that that's so much inherent to the ring and Sauron's evil as it is Boromir's path to his own corruption.
I still quite often think about like how much Boromir would have done if the ring had no corrupting power at all, if he still would have made similar choices. Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll never know, but like if it was like, the elven rings that just have power but don't have any sort of corrupting influence on people at all. They're just they're neutral power. Like, I feel like Boromir would have responded pretty similarly. Maybe, possibly.
But I think there'd have been a lot less resistance to using an Elven Ring equivalent
From everybody else around him, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I really like, and I know that this is a good work for it, but the difference between a hypnotic corruption and a reasoned corruption, like Tolkien illustrates here, I think those are two very distinct things, and it's hard to say which one's really scarier, because something that, you know, using free will or logic convinces you, like, you don't even know, like, I feel like the implication, if you're under something hypnotic, like, you feel a pull, but you know it doesn't make sense. There's some dissonance where if you're convinced of something, you don't even know that you're corrupted, you know?
It's the difference between mind control and changing hearts.
Yeah, exactly.
Sauron's into that mind control, that overriding of free will,
Mm-hmm.
and Saruman's into changing hearts.
Yeah, exactly. Like, a persuasive corruption is very scary to me.
Saruman, in the Zimmerman script, commits suicide, which I agree with Tolkien is a poor ending for him, precisely because Saruman knows what awaits him after death.
Yeah, I also like the way that Tolkien put it, where he said he would cling to life no matter what. Like, that's just where he's at. And it really did characterize Saruman in a way that I really liked. That, you know, he starts to beg for his life at the end in the New Line Cinema movies and everything like that too. I mean, he's Saruman, so he's very persuasive about it. But he's like, okay,
his demise in the New Line Cinema movies is pretty sudden. He doesn't get to beg for his life. He asks for his freedom. He demands his freedom.
Mm-hmm. Well, he kind of is parlaying, right? And he's doing it persuasively, but that's just, I feel like, an intelligent, persuasive wizard's way of begging for their life. He was begging for his life from Gandalf when Grima killed him, right? He didn't have his eye on the right target for who was going to kill him, but I think he knew he was pretty doomed.
Gandalf wasn't going to kill him.
Yeah, maybe Saruman would have known that too.
I think Saruman was discussing terms of freedom with Gandalf.
And I remember you mentioning, though I kind of want to save it for the books because it's already escaped my mind, but there is some differences in his death in the books and the movies, right?
A lot of differences, and I'm going to keep that as under wraps as I can until we get to it in the books. It's too good to spoil for you.
I think we mentioned it pretty directly in the episode, but it's escaped my mind, so I'm glad that it unspoiled itself, so to speak. I don't remember.
Don't go back and listen to those episodes then. Okay. I don't think it's there. I don't remember it, but I want to try to keep the ending as much of a surprise for you as I can. It might have just been
like that. You said that it was quite different, and that's where we left it to. Maybe that's all that we said. I don't remember. It's been a while since we recorded those.
Yeah.
So at the end of this letter, the last paragraph, he mentions the script has the part 3 is only just notes and not fleshed out. I thought that was really funny because it reminded me of the Bakshi Lord of the Rings movie, just petering out after the Battle of Helm's Deep. Like, it was almost like eerily reminiscent of that for me.
I'm glad we got at least one complete adaptation.
Yeah.
So, in summary of this entire letter, Tolkien thought this script sucked.
Yeah. Yeah, at the start of the letter, he seemed a little bit more even-keeled, but like it seems like the more it went on, the more he just couldn't stand hiding his disdain for it. I really want to read this original script, though. Like, I know it's lost to time as far as we know, but it would be really funny to see.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the Zimmerman script anywhere, but maybe the internet will correct us if I'm wrong. In the meantime, we have a question that needs answering.
This question is: are there any recorded pieces of Orcish music? Do they just have metal bands? From our secret Orcish admirer. So I think this has been obviously answered in the canon. It's a new wave infused proto-goth, industrial folk rock marching music with funk adjacent rhythms and cabaret theatricality. I'm looking at Goblin Town and Where There's a Whip. These are absolutely canon. Where there's a whip,
there's a way.
That is absolutely what Orc's music is. It doesn't. I still think back to when I asked if that was like a poem from the book.
We don't want to go to war today.
Outside of Where There's a Whip, if we try to analyze the way that we did with food for industrialization and music, I guess that would be like extremely basic pop. And I just want to note that I don't hate on pop. I like a lot of pop, but I'm saying like the extremely derivative radio only pop. The only issue with this, I think, is orcs seem a little bit edgier than a lot of pop music themes, maybe. So I'm thinking like mainstream radio metal, like maybe The Offspring or Disturbed or Three Doors Down, like kind of like divorced dad rock.
What about AI generated music?
Maybe. AI generated music can sound, I mean, it sounds AI generated, but it can sound like all sorts of different things, but that might be pretty good. Orcs probably don't get a lot of money for any of the music. Like the orc musicians probably can't make a living, even the most popular ones. Maybe they just maybe they do just generate their music through AI.
I don't think Sauron allows anyone to have a job as a musician.
No, I don't think he'd like it. I don't know though. It's like if we're saying like Sauron is industrialization, it's like
Saruman is industrialization.
Saruman, yeah. Oh, and Sauron's the orcs. I don't know. I could see him like saying like you could escape the army by like creating propaganda and stuff. Like our society, you know, like you could win the musician lottery and become a pop star and you would get out of the rat race, you know. I could see him using that to get the orcs to make great regaling songs about how much orcs should love Sauron.
Yeah. No.
But we don't see much about, you know, again, like the orcs, what their home life is like. I think it would be very much interesting to see that at some point.
Yeah. Well, we actually have a song in The Hobbit that the goblins sing as they're capturing the dwarves and Bilbo. Obviously, because it's in the book, we don't have music. It's just a poem. But we are told the goblins are singing it. And a sample of that poem is as follows. Crush, smack, whip, crack, smash, grab, pinch, nab, you go, my lad. Ho, ho, my lad. Goblins quaff and goblins beat. Goblins laugh and goblins bleat. Batter, jabber, whip and hammer. Ho, you go, my lad. Ho, ho, my lad. And there's many... there may be references to war drums, but I don't remember for sure if there are any specifically. The poem in The Hobbit is the only definite lyrical testimony to orcish music, I think.
I think if we put those lyrics over like some early 2000s new metal guitar, it would sound a lot like Godsmack or something like that.
Next up, our band.
You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
A special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey, and thank you for listening.